It's Wednesday, April 23rd, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Herms. Today on the show, no scalps. It's the new refrain from the White House that staffers are using, especially after the administration is off to a rocky start this week, as a few major news stories rock the administration, all of them self-inflicted wounds of one kind or another, over members of the government that Trump himself appointed. First, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is caught up in yet another scandal involving the Signal messaging app, where he was sending sensitive or classified information again. Then, President Trump backed down after weeks of sounding off against Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, even threatening to fire him, something he can do. We'll talk about that a little later. He backed down after making a whole bunch of noise about it. And then, Elon Musk's days at Doge are numbered, says him. The world's richest man says he's had enough after his company's stocks hit an all-time low, his agency is coming up short, and he's tired of people making fun of him about both things. But let's start with Signal, the sequel. Over the weekend, the New York Times reported that Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, was found to have been sharing the same sensitive, if not classified, information about the U.S. airstrike on Houthi rebels in Yemen back in March. This time, he was sharing it with his wife, his brother, and his personal attorney on a group chat known as Team Huddle. Apparently, that was the title of it. Now, the airstrike was the same one about which he sent attack plans that military experts said would have been classified in a Signal group chat with some of the highest government officials we have and the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, who was accidentally added to this group. Now, just a little bit of background there in case you don't remember that story. Signal is an encrypted messaging app, but it's not cleared for sensitive or classified information, and Hegseth's own Department of Defense warned against using it just a few days after the Signal story broke, something that was actually coincidental and not related to that story. They were already going to tell members of the Department of Defense, don't use Signal for sensitive information. It's easily hacked. Now, this latest revelation about Hegseth sharing this information is somehow worse, even though it is getting less coverage in the media this week because of, well, everything. But in the first case, that group was, like I said, full of high-level government officials, cabinet secretaries, national security advisors, and the vice president. Now, a majority of those folks have to swear oaths of office to get their jobs, and at least in theory, all of them are supposed to be more serious about keeping national secrets than your average person. But whether they do that or not, we can debate. But even if they don't hold up their end of the oaths as sacred, they all hold their loyalty to Donald Trump as sacred, so they have an incentive to keep those things secret. This second chat, or at least the revelation of a second chat, according to the New York Times, while his brother and personal lawyer do have jobs at the Pentagon, there is no reason for them to know this information. And when it comes to Hegseth's wife, a woman who's a former Fox News producer, she has even less business having access to this kind of information. Here is how retired four-star Admiral William McRaven, the guy who oversaw the mission to take out Osama bin Laden, said it on CNN this week.
But make no mistake about it, these were operational plans with operational details. They were classified. But you'll also recognize that there was not a single uniformed person on any of those Signal chats, because I have no doubt that had there been a military officer on those chats, they would have said, Mr. Secretary, it's a bad idea using this. We need to go to our secure network to be able to talk.
And frankly, this is something I haven't thought about before when thinking about these things, but he's right. In both chats, not a single person in uniform was a part of that. Not a single service member was a part of that, except for, I guess, the CIA officer who was outed by the CIA director. Now, even McRaven said there that this information would have been classified as well, which lends an even scarier version to this. Now, this second round of playing it fast and loose with attack plans comes as there's been a lot of focus on Hegseth's wife, Jennifer, as well, who has frequently been on foreign trips with him, which isn't all that uncommon for the spouse of a secretary, though it's not as common as it's been for the Hegseths. What is more striking is that Jennifer has joined Hegseth in high-level political and foreign meetings, and meetings with Senate Republicans. The Pentagon insists that she leaves before any classified information is discussed, but given the fact that Hegseth was found to have been sharing sensitive info here on this chat, who actually knows what's happening? And then we learn that the information that Hegseth has been sharing with these people, who certainly did not have clearance to see it, came from a top general's communication with Hegseth, a secure, government-approved channel. And Hegseth, the guy in charge of our national defense, chose to ignore the importance of that. Now, in the days since the story broke, Hegseth has been forcefully defending himself, but it's been odd. Here he is at the White House egg roll on Easter Sunday.
You know, what a big surprise that a few leakers get fired and suddenly a bunch of hit pieces come out from the same media that peddled the Russia hoax. Won't give back their Pulitzers. They got Pulitzers for a bunch of lies. Pulitzers for a bunch of lies and on hoaxes time and time and time again. And as they peddle those lies, no one ever calls them on it. See, this is what the media does. They take anonymous sources from disgruntled former employees, and then they try to slash and burn people and ruin their reputations. Not going to work with me, because we're changing the Defense Department, putting the Pentagon back in the hands of warfighters, and anonymous smears from disgruntled former employees on old news doesn't matter. So I'm happy to be here at the Easter egg roll with my dad and my kids, because, you know, this is what we're doing it for. These kids right here. This is why we're fighting the fake news media. This is why we're fighting slash and burn Democrats. This is why we're fighting hoaxsters. This group, this group right here, full of hoaxsters that peddle anonymous sources from leakers with axes to grind, and then you put it all together as if it's some news story. And when we know it, we know exactly what it is. So I'm really proud of what we're doing for the president, fighting hard across the board, and I'm going to go roll some Easter eggs with my kids. Thank you very much.
So I'm not going to go through every point there, because the main thing here is this is not a guy who is in control. This is a guy lashing out in some fairly nonsense ways, because there is no world in which there's a chance that someone at the Pentagon didn't brief him about this story breaking before he went out in public, about this latest leak, as he calls it, and didn't give him some lines to say when he was definitely going to get asked about it. And there is absolutely no chance that he wasn't given some kind of media training after the last time he was caught using Signal, and he didn't fall back on those things either. And instead here, he's blaming it on recently fired staff who were let go after Hegseth has been unable to get his own department in order. And there's been some reporting lately that the Pentagon has had some really serious infighting and rivalries happening, the kind that we haven't seen since the kind of infighting before 9/11 that was found to have at least contributed in part to not catching the 9/11 attackers. Now, the people who were recently fired were fired under the guise of a Pentagon-wide leaking investigation, and that included the person who told the press about Elon Musk being invited to a top-secret meeting about whether the U.S. had war plans against China or what those would look like, and Hegseth's own former top aide who initially joined that Signal group chat that Hegseth would later share operational details on last month. Now, Hegseth also did all of this sort of song and dance and this bizarre behavior in front of his kids. They were standing right behind him. He was doing a lot of moving, kind of bouncing all over, gesturing pretty wildly. It was a really strange response to this question, especially from somebody in his position, regardless of who he is. And then he wasn't done either. The next day, he went back to his old stomping grounds, Fox News, Fox and Friends, the morning show, where he was given a segment of his own with host Brian Kilmeade to explain himself. Here's some of that.
Some others. So, Brian, if you remember when this all started, the first go-around, because this is the second go-around, right? They peddle old stuff, they kick it back up. I said repeatedly, no one's texting war plans. You know why I said that? Because I'm in the bowels of the Pentagon every single day. Just 10 minutes ago, I was looking at actual war plans of things that were ongoing or pending things to happen, because that's on a regular basis on classified systems. That's my job for the war fighters, for the President of the United States. I look at war plans every single day. what was shared over Signal, then and now, however you characterize it, was informal, unclassified coordinations for media coordination and other things. That's what I've said from the beginning. At the beginning, it was left-wing reporters from The Atlantic who got a hold of it and then wanted to create a problem for the president. This is what it's all about.
Right after this, he swears that they take classified information really seriously and that no one was talking about war plans over Signal, which might be the military definition of war plans. They have a specific meaning, like an invasion of some kind, which then Hegseth turns around in this thing you just heard and says he was looking at war plans. And he probably shouldn't be telling anybody that he's looking at war plans of any kind like he just did. So, that's not great. But his history here is all over the road. The information wasn't even that bad because his communication was informal, but also it's a dangerous leak from the military. But maybe it's not so dangerous for military members, but it certainly is damaging politically to the president, but it's also serious. The logic here just doesn't add up. And again, in this interview, Hegseth is gesturing wildly, he's sort of swaying and bouncing around. None of it has helped him beat the accusations and rumors that he has continued his problem drinking that was so publicly talked about during his confirmation hearing while he's been defense secretary. And as soon as Tuesday, there were rumors that Hegseth might step down. His handling of Pentagon staff, these scandals, and the rumors about his leadership in general had become a distraction for the White House, but Trump is standing by him. Here he was at the White House on Sunday.
Are you bringing up Signal again? I thought they gave that up 2 weeks ago.
There was a new report this weekend that we used in a separate chat that included some family.
It's all just the same old stuff from the media. That's an old one. Try finding something new.
So it does seem like in this clip that Trump hadn't heard about this story when it broke. That's becoming a common theme from this second administration for Trump. For him to appear in front of the press and be unable to hide the fact that he's not in the know somehow. But that's a different story for a different episode. So far, he said he is not going to be calling on Hegseth to step down. We'll come to why a little later in this episode. But speaking of calling for firings, let's move on to Trump backing down on his economic agenda again, this time by reversing course on wanting the chair of the Federal Reserve to resign. Trump has been pretty upset with Fed Chair Jerome Powell, who has refused to lower interest rates because the Fed, which is in charge of the policies that make sure our economy doesn't collapse, has been trying to do just that, while Trump has caused massive economic turmoil. Then, last week, Trump's White House economic advisor, Kevin Hassett, was asked if Trump would try to fire Jerome Powell. And here's what he said, quote, "The president and his team will continue to study that matter. Firing Jay Powell is an option in a way that it wasn't before." And the Wall Street Journal reported White House lawyers were looking into whether they could fire Powell for cause, which is the only way he could get fired under the law, but there just doesn't seem to be a cause that wouldn't lead to a pretty ugly court fight. Here's how Trump put it in the Oval Office on Monday.
I'm not happy with him. I let him know it, and if I want him out, he'll be out of there real fast, believe me.
Firing the Fed chair, especially right now, would cause even more uncertainty in an already very uncertain economy, causing even more of the problems that we've seen, which, according to the Wall Street Journal, is what eventually forced the Secretaries of Treasury, Scott Bessent, and Commerce, Howard Lutnick, to step in and convince Trump not to try to find a reason to fire Powell, saying that because the Federal Reserve is a board of people, anyone who took Powell's place would likely have the same view because, Powell is just doing his job. On top of all this, Powell has said repeatedly that he's not going anywhere and wouldn't step down if Trump asked him to. It's also worth pointing out here that Powell was originally appointed by Trump in 2017 and started his term in 2018. Now, the Fed chair serves for 4 years, and he was renominated by Biden and has another year left on his current term. But still, the only reason he's in this position in the first place is because Trump asked him to be there. And all of this put together meant that yesterday, Trump reversed course on his plan to oust Powell and said essentially, never mind.
No, I have no intention of firing him. I would like to see him be a little more active in terms of his idea to lower interest rates. This is a perfect time to lower interest rates. If he doesn't, is it the end? No, it's not. But it would be good timing. She could have taken place earlier. But no, I have no intention to fire him.
So you can still tell that Trump is unhappy, but knows that he can't press this any further, which, in a way does mean that there's at least some voices in Bessent and Lutnick that he'll listen to. But this is the fourth time that Trump has backed away from an economic plan in as many months, or he's blinked when someone has called his bluff. I know I'm mixing metaphors there, but the whiplash here is all real self-inflicted wounds. And it's another story here with Powell about how it seems that Trump doesn't have a vision for his policies or proposals when it comes to the economy right now, and doesn't have an understanding of the consequences when he just says things out loud. It also means that he could still swing back to threatening to fire Powell if interest rates aren't lowered on his preferred timeline. And I guess we'll just have to wait and see. And speaking of timelines here, let's get to our last topic. Elon Musk set a timeline for himself for stepping back from his duties in the White House to try and pull Tesla out of its nosedive. So Musk really only had about a month or so left on his special government employee status, which is what he was officially categorized by the administration to be able to do the stuff that he's been doing. But in the last couple of weeks, it's been really rough for Musk. There have been a lot of reports that he's been fighting with cabinet secretaries and White House advisors. A lot of staffers were saying as far back as September, but are certainly saying now that he's worn out his welcome among people in Trump's inner circle. Doge hasn't saved anywhere close to the amount of money that he's promised, and likely won't, based on his own estimates. I'll talk about that in a second. He's been accused of trying to use his young son as a human shield to protect him from snipers, and Tesla dealerships have been attacked or vandalized while the company's worth has cratered. Case in point, we learned this week Tesla stock dropped 71% since January, netting hundreds of millions of dollars in losses that most economists and analysts blame on Musk's role in the White House, along with the vitriol that he spews on X. And it's not hard to see how that could happen, given how short, like I said, his efforts have fallen at Doge, from somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 trillion saved this year, that was his original promise, to about $150 billion, which is what he said at the most recent cabinet meeting. That is far below his own estimate, and I've talked about that before. But maybe the most important thing for Musk, he's tired of getting bullied for the things he says and does. Over the weekend, the Washington Post reported that Musk was, quote, tired of fielding what he views as a slew of nasty and unethical attacks from the political left, and wants to leave public, at least political life. And then today, he said over the course of the next month, he'd be stepping back from his role at Doge significantly, and despite law and policies surrounding how long he can actually be a special government employee, he wants to work at least a couple days a week in the White House or for the administration for the next 4 years. Whether that will actually happen, and whether he can actually do it, though who would stop him, is still pretty unclear. But him leaving for these reasons and not pushing to re-up his special government employee status, for Trump to not step in and say that he's been doing such a fantastic job, he's been saying that a lot less in the recent weeks, is telling here, but Trump is stopping short of saying he doesn't want Musk around. Likely for the first reason that Musk has a giant pile of money that he's going to continue to throw at Republicans, and if Trump wants to somehow run for another term, Musk will likely back him, but also for another reason that actually connects all three of these stories. It's the phrase, no scalps. The Atlantic's Jonathan Lemire wrote about it the day after the Hegseth Signal story dropped, saying that several advisors, both inside and outside the White House, are pushing to make sure that there aren't any high-profile firings in the first 100 days of Trump's presidency, saying, quote, the last thing he, Trump, wants is to give you guys in the media a scalp. And since then, Trump world has used the phrase no scalps repeatedly. This goes back to the first Trump administration, which especially in its last year, was plagued by high-profile firings and resignations and the mercurial nature of how Trump treated his high-level staffers. But a lot of those people who were secretaries or advisors became some of Trump's biggest and most vocal critics. And having a major shakeup, like losing a defense secretary or trying to illegally fire or actually illegally firing the Fed chair, would also be a real sign that maybe Trump isn't as in control of his second administration as he promises to be or promised he would be. And that kind of insecurity is something that voters and Americans writ large are really sensitive to. It would also create an immediate class of high-profile former officials who would be in papers, on TV, on podcasts, talking poorly about Trump and how he runs things, something the White House doesn't want to have to fight while they're still getting things in place in their first year. And I know it's hard to think that it hasn't been that long, but it's only been just over 90 days since January 20th. So that's why Trump is still standing by Hegseth, even though either signal scandal he's been involved in would mean an immediate resignation. No scalps is really why he isn't going after Powell anymore. And it's why he's still standing by Elon Musk, even though there's been a lot of internal pressure to push him out. And I think the biggest question now is, if the mantra in the first 100 days is no scalps, what happens on day 101? And I'm going to leave you with that question for today, because that is it for this episode. Please rate and review the show, whatever podcast app you're listening this on. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications on YouTube so you don't miss out on any new episodes. It also really helps spread the word on that platform. You can also subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got brand new articles up all week long. It's just $5 a month. And as always, follow the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on X and Blue Sky, and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you on Friday.